Following the success of Lethal Weapon in 1987, Warner Brothers were quick to release a sequel in the summer of 1989, and Lethal Weapon 2 ended up being the third highest grossing film in North America the year of its release, earning almost $150 million. For the film's British release, Warner Brothers were keen to reach the widest possible audience. With Lethal Weapon having received an 18 rating in 1987, Warner Brothers opted to request a 15 rating from the BBFC for the UK cinema release of Lethal Weapon 2. However, as regular viewers of Cutting Edge will know, the BBFC's chief censor James Furman took a firm stance against violence in Hollywood action films of the 80s and 90s, and Lethal Weapon 2 was no exception. And in this edition of Cutting Edge, we'll be taking a look at what scenes he cut from the film for the viewing displeasure of British audiences. After viewing the uncut version of Lethal Weapon 2, Furman decreed the cuts were required for a 15 rating in reels 5 and 6. The first scene to be affected was Murtaugh's killing of two South African villains who ambush him at home. The original uncut scene plays as follows. For the UK cinema version, Furman's cuts list to the distributors demanded: when Black Hero uses nail gun to fight off two villains, remove lingering close-up of nail in man's forehead before he sinks to floor. In addition to this change, Furman also stated that the scene should be darkened, in order to minimize sight of blood. This darkening of the image was applied to the close-up shots of nails embedded in the two bad guys, with the UK cinema version of the scene having played something like this. The next scene that was cut in the UK cinema version was the sex scene between Riggs and Rika. The uncut version contained the following material. For the UK cinema version, Furman demanded: in intercut sex scene between Mel Gibson and girlfriend, remove lingering slow thrusting shots as he is on top of her. With these changes made, the affected material in the cut version plays like this. Following Riggs and Rika's escape from the gunfight which follows, Riggs is thrown into a dock to drown at the hands of two thugs. After falling into the water and freeing himself, Riggs discovers Rika's body in the water and emerges on the surface filled with rage. He proceeds to kill Rika's killers in a brutal assault, which plays as follows in the uncut version. James Furman took a particular dislike to our hero's vengeful actions and issued the following cut to Warner Brothers. After girlfriend's body is discovered by Gibson underwater, remove entire scene of instant revenge when he emerges and kills two men, breaking one's neck and slamming the other's head repeatedly in car door. As a result, the dock scene was more or less ruined in the UK cinema version. Due to the BBFC's cuts, Michael Kamen's musical score jumps noticeably at the point where the two killings were removed, and Riggs is seen picking up a chain that mysteriously disappears following his appearance on the water's surface. As a quick aside, the American television version of the film retains the scene, but edits it slightly differently. Gone is the sound of Riggs breaking the first bad guy's neck, and the killing of the second is reduced to a minimum. It is interesting to ponder whether this edit of the sequence might have been acceptable to the BBFC, as we feel it is a good compromise between the uncut version and the atrociously cut UK cinema version. Getting back to the UK cinema version, in reel 6 of the film there were 2 more cuts demanded by Furman. At this point in the film, Riggs is aware that the South African villains have killed many of his fellow cops, so his anger and desire for revenge are stronger than they ever were. As Riggs and Murtaugh storm the villain's ship, the Alba Varden, Riggs empties the entire contents of his pistol's magazine into one unlucky enemy, as his voiceover names the cops that the South Africans have killed, climaxing with a final shout of "Rika." The scene in the uncut version plays thus.
Well, I'm going this way.
I'll go this way, I'll check over here.
Once again, Furman took issue with what he saw as a sympathetic character using more force than was necessary to serve the narrative of the film, with his cuts list demanding: in gunfight of hold of ship, reduced to minimum number of impact shots to gunman as Gibson advances to finish him off. With these cuts made, the sequence in the UK cinema version looked horrendous, losing almost all of Riggs' voiceover, coupled with a clear jump cut in the positioning of both Riggs and the enemy within the frame, as this clip demonstrates.
I'll go this way, I'll check over here.
On the other hand, we should perhaps be grateful that Warner Brothers chose not to edit the scene as they did for the American TV version, which uses repeated footage and clumsy editing to mask the bullet impacts into the torso of the unfortunate bad guy. The finale of Lethal Weapon 2 was the last part of the film to receive cuts. The final showdown between Riggs and Vorstead plays as follows in the uncut version. Despite its rather undetailed nature, the scene also features details of knife play, which Furman usually objected to, but the knife play was actually left untouched, with Furman instead instructing the distributors to cut the scene thus. When Gibson fights villain in Hold of Ship, considerably reduce the number of kicks to Gibson's face. As a result of this demand, the UK cinema version played something like this. After Warner Brothers had recut the offending scenes in the film, the BBFC passed Lethal Weapon 2 with a 15 rating on September the 20th, 1989. The film was later submitted for a VHS classification in 1990, and the version submitted by Warner Brothers was the uncut American version of the film. Warner Brothers were happy to accept a higher 18 rating on video, but Furman still demanded cuts to the film, remarking rather colourfully at the time that some major releases were cut to 15 on film to attract a teenage audience, and then released at 18 on video in a fuller version. With Lethal Weapon 2, however, the board refused to reinstate fully the cuts in two scenes in which the hero indulged his vengeful instincts far beyond the needs of the narrative. The two scenes that Furman refers to concern Riggs's killing of the two South African thugs at the dockside and his repeated shooting of the enemy on the ship. As a result, the BBFC cuts list for the video version stated, "When hero comes to surface after escaping from straitjacket underwater, remove his slaughter of two villains by removing them from the scene altogether, cutting away after shot of Gibson emerging from water and resuming on him standing by car." Followed by, "Reduce Gibson's repeated shooting as he advances on man in Hold of Ship by cutting away after first set of impacts on victim's chest to remove all further impacts and sight of gun poked into victim's stomach for coup de grace, resuming on long shot as victim falls." These cuts effectively reduced these two scenes as per the UK cinema version. After 32 seconds of cuts had been made, the BBFC passed Lethal Weapon 2 for a VHS release on February the 28th, 1990. A slightly less censored widescreen version of the film was later passed with only 24 seconds of cuts on July the 20th, 1992. In the widescreen version, the scene where Riggs kills the enemy on the ship was slightly longer in comparison to previous versions, with the BBFC allowing the reinstatement of around a second or so of the enemy being riddled with bullets. The scene was still reduced in comparison to the uncut version, however. What follows is a comparison between the previously seen example of the 15-rated cinema version and the slightly more comprehensible 18-rated widescreen version. A few years later, Warner Bros. Released so-called director's cuts of the first 3 Lethal Weapon films on video and DVD. With regards to Lethal Weapon 2, the director's cut version was submitted for a UK classification in 1999, and once again Warner Bros. Had reinstated all of the previously censored material missing from the previous UK versions. However, the BBFC demanded that the 2 contentious scenes in the previous UK video versions be censored for the director's cut. In the case of Riggs' scene on the Alba Varden, the BBFC stipulated that even more footage be removed from the shooting of the villain. Perhaps realising that the old cut versions of the sequence played out rather badly, they felt it was better to simply remove all but the start of the shooting altogether, including the sight of the villain slumping down the wall. The cuts list sent to the distributors was thus expanded upon, with the BBFC now demanding reduce Gibson's repeated shooting as he advances on man in hold of ship by cutting away after first set of impacts on victim's chest to remove all further impacts and sight of him poking his gun into victim's gut for coup de grace, resuming on close-up of handle. The handle in this cut refers to the shot which follows the shooting sequence when a South African agent opens up a hatch on the ship. Had these cuts been implemented, the sequence would have played as follows. In the end, it would appear that Warner Bros. Elected to edit the scene as per the 1992 video version, and the film was past 18 in January 1999. The double killing on the docks was edited slightly better with regards to the musical score. The music does not jump as badly as it does in the original UK theatrical version. This is a quick look at the difference in sound mixing between the censored UK theatrical cut and the censored UK version of the director's cut. Notice how the jump in the music at the point we cut to Riggs standing by the car is subtly different in the 2 versions. The BBFC passed the director's cut of Lethal Weapon 2 in January 1999 after 31 seconds of cuts, and this would go on to be the main version available to British buyers on home video for over 10 years. However, 2010 saw a UK Blu-ray release of all 4 theatrical cuts of the Lethal Weapons, with Furman having long since departed the BBFC. The first 2 films in the series were submitted to the BBFC for contemporary certificates. Both were downgraded to a 15 rating, with the added bonus of the BBFC waiving all of its cinema and video cuts for Lethal Weapon 2. After 21 years, UK audiences finally had access to the uncut version of Lethal Weapon 2 on home video, which was classified by the BBFC on August the 20th, 2010, with the BBFC stating that the film contains strong language, violence, threat, and sex. With regards to the other films in the series, Lethal Weapon 3 has always been uncut in the UK with a 15 rating, whilst Lethal Weapon 4 received heavy cuts for its original UK cinema release and subsequent home video incarnations. The cuts to Lethal Weapon 4 have been covered in a previous episode of Cutting Edge, but the UK Blu-ray release of the film is entirely uncut, despite there appearing to be no official BBFC classification listed for the uncut version of the film. In other words, UK buyers can confidently pick up the Blu-ray box set of all 4 Lethal Weapon films, happy in the knowledge that they are getting the full, uncensored versions of all 4 films as intended by the filmmakers.
We'll follow him, get the map, and find the treasure.
We haven't put enough food on board.
We need less mouths.
Kill them! Kill them all!